Good afternoon, everybody. As you heard, we're very rushed, so hopefully I won't talk too fast for you, which is a tendency I have, unfortunately. But we want to allow some time for some questions. There's a couple of more people that will join us shortly on the panel. But firstly, really, I just want to introduce everything. This is the most exciting market. This is the biggest market in North Asia we've left to the last in the day. So hopefully that's going to be riveting enough for you to keep you engaged. It's been a long day, I know. We're speaking about the Greater LCC China markets, or as I like to call them, Fortress China versus the avalanche of the LCCs, because it seems to have lots of walls around it. It's a very interesting landscape. Perhaps if you can just indulge me to give you a 2-minute overview of my experience. I've been in airlines for a long time, low-cost airlines in particular over the last 8-9 years. Just recently, I was up until a couple of months ago, the CEO of Garuda Indonesia's low-cost airline in Indonesia called CityLink. Prior to that, I was the founding CEO for Jetstar Asia out of Singapore. And one of the privileges I had with Jetstar Asia was introducing the first low-cost airline flights into Hong Kong and Taiwan back in 2004. And it was a very exciting time because we were taking a new model to this part of the world a long time ago now. And it was very encouraging to work with people like the Hong Kong Airport Authority, who actively engaged in setting up power in and power out bays, away from aero bridges, to really try to accommodate the low-cost airline needs and enable us a better cost base. But at the same time, I remember my first visit to a travel agent in Hong Kong, where they said to me, "We're really excited you're here, and we really welcome Jetstar Asia, but we're not selling a single ticket." Because some other very angry mob basically said, if we do, we're never going to sell one of their tickets ever again. So it's a very interesting landscape. Another one of my experiences, and one of the reasons I'm very fond of Macau, was the CEO for Viva Macau, which was a medium/long-haul low-cost airline. Unfortunately, now demised, but I was here for 3 years, between 2006 and 2009 running that. And that was a very interesting experience and some learnings out of that, which I'll touch on in the presentation. Sorry? No? There we go. So just initially to introduce the Greater China region. Well, Greater China is home to the largest population in the world. The middle class in China itself is predicted to reach 900 million people by 2030. Low-cost airlines themselves are not officially recognised in China. And although the model has proven successful, and really the avenue for growth in terms of airline markets, not the full-service airline model, the policy in this part of the world has really been to continue to push the travelling public to the full-service airlines. The few low-cost airlines that do exist in Greater China today, Spring included, relative to the market potential that sits here, are very, very modest in size. There are some attractive economics and demographics about North Asia, and in particular China. There are many, many airports which are not as congested perhaps as some of their Southeastern Asian counterparts, which could be very good homes for low-cost airlines if the market were more open. And obviously we have seen, and I've had it as direct experience, a reluctance to see low-cost airlines grow in this part of the world. I hope I haven't pressed that twice. Just to show the LCC capacity share from 2001 and 2011 for this part of the world. We have lines there that include and exclude Hong Kong and Macau. But if you look at, say, the blue line and the grey line, which are the larger, they include Hong Kong and Macau, and it's Greater China International, being the blue line, and grey being the domestic market. That's the share of LCC traffic in this part of the world. And the greatest percentage on that graph is 5.9%. So it's still very, very low, and it's very much in its infancy. The history of LCCs in Greater China, the early pioneers were a mix of both short and long haul. Spring being an example of that in China itself, and in Hong Kong, of course, we had Oasis, and in Macau we had Viva Macau. The reasons for that were a combination of traffic rights and policy in the area which drove those outcomes in the early days. China has only a few modestly sized low-cost airlines, as I've said, Spring, Juneyao, and they've all been growth constrained so far. And to a large extent, the LCC markets in China are actually being exploited more so by foreign carrier LCCs today, than actually homegrown airlines themselves. Just looking at it on an aircraft order basis, if we look a little bit to the south of here and you look at the aircraft orders that sit amongst the Lion Airs, the Air Asias, the Jetsstars and so on, and you look at the number of aircraft that are on order, about 1,000 odd. and there's no China or Greater China LCC that features in that yet. This is home to the largest population and a much larger population. So that's the potential that still lays ahead. The recent announcement of the joint venture in Hong Kong between Jetstar and China Eastern is the first homegrown initiative we've heard or seen in this part of the world for some time. It brings together a local full-service airline and the foreign low-cost airline investment and experience, similar model to what AirAsia and Jetstar have done in other parts in Asia. But the question remains, will it succeed? Will it ultimately succeed? I'm sure it will fly, or will it ultimately succeed as a business in the long term? It faces some challenges, strong opposition from the homegrown airlines, infrastructure constraints, particularly with Hong Kong Airport, and many of the traffic rights are quite well utilised out of Hong Kong, and whatever may be on the shelf will be fiercely competed, albeit there are some secondary cities in China which have open, unlimited rights that potentially could be exploited. So, why is this so? I spent a lot of time when I was here crying that like that very time. So turning to China more specifically, the airports are still growing very strongly. The passenger markets are growing very strongly. As you can see on this chart, some of the secondary airports are growing between 15 to 24% per annum. It's significant. And even the more mature airports are growing by a very healthy percentage. Beijing itself will become the largest airport in the world in passenger number terms, overtaking Atlanta this year. China itself is, excuse me, primarily a domestic market. As you can see on the chart here, almost 80% of the traffic, or the seats in the market, are domestic seats, and only some 21.2% are international seats. The wide bodies are a bit of a reflection of this. In China itself, there's only about 190 wide bodies in service. If you look in Hong Kong, Cathay and Dragonair between them have 150 just on their own. If you look at wide body orders in the Greater China, again, it's quite a modest number relative to what's going on in other parts of the world. And given the size of the market, obviously we're not seeing that long-term investment in the long-haul markets quite as yet. There are many airports, as I touched on earlier, in China, which would be conducive to low-cost airline type operations. So there's enormous potential there, obviously, from an airport perspective. Internationally, albeit it's a smaller share of the total pie, it still has been growing significantly as well. From 2001 to 2011, the number of international seats have tripled. So that also is showing some healthy growth off a smaller base. Where China sits in per capita income, where it sits in terms of propensity to travel, it also shows it's still a very mature market. If you can see up on the chart there, the world average is marked, and in a red circle, over sort of on the left around the 0.1, that's where China sits. With a population of about 1.5 billion, imagine, I mean the number's just unimaginable what it would be, say, if you compare to an Australian market where it's like 3 times the population to 1. That would mean a domestic travel market of 4.5 billion people for China in time. That is the potential we are looking at here. In fact, if you look at the CAAC's numbers themselves and some information from CAPA, they are predicting significant growth, albeit what the current policies may be. By 2015, it's predicted that the market will be 450 million passengers and an astonishing 1.5 billion by 2030. LCC penetration, as I mentioned earlier, is very low in the region, and it's low in China. In 2011, 3.5% internationally and 6.1% domestically. We only have about 5 low-cost airlines operating in China at the moment. Given the size and the number of cities in China, there's obviously potential for those to be much larger, but also the potential for many new entrants in time. However, the current policy means that they all pretty much don't operate to the traditional low-cost airline model that we may be familiar with in, say, Europe. You know, they've got constraints, whether it be on operating strategy or what they're allowed to do at the airports or how they're allowed to recruit pilots or what the airport charges are and the like. So the LCC explosion in China is still being constrained. Having said that, there are 12 international LCCs that do fly into China, and here's some of them, and it's a growing list. Given the domestic constraints, there is some looking at what regional services can be operated out of China for the Chinese carriers. Spring's been rumoured to be looking, and I won't ask you this question, Jonathan, Spring's been rumoured to be looking at a joint venture in Japan. looking at services to Thailand, and they're examining potentially services to India via Western China. Where they sit in terms of the size of domestic airlines in China, Spring and Hainan, who are the largest of the LCCs in Greater China, are the 10th and 14th largest airlines in China, respectively. Turning to Hong Kong, high barriers to entry also. Once there was, but now there's not. Oasis, I guess the world's first ultra-long-haul, low-cost airline. Have a long debate about what happened to Oasis, but I guess in short, wrong aircraft, wrong fuel environment, and a very, very competitive route which they chose to put all their investment into, with basically a frequency that was not that competitive. So it was a really, really tough ask for them, but it wasn't easy going for them, so they're no more. Hong Kong, of course, is home to Cathay Pacific, I think the 6th largest airline as measured by international traffic in the world. They don't have much of a love for low-cost airlines. They don't necessarily believe in low-cost airlines for Hong Kong itself. And certainly if there's any low-cost airline established in Hong Kong, they will be competing with that vigorously, absolutely no doubt. There are regulatory constraints in Hong Kong. The airport's a very busy airport. It's not uncommon to be sitting on the ground 30 minutes waiting to get up into the air even after pushback. It's a busy, busy airport. So operating a low-cost airline with quick turnarounds and short-haul flights coming in and out of the airport very, very often is going to be no easy task in terms of access. And of course, I mentioned earlier, the traffic rights out of Hong Kong are relatively well utilised. So, you know, exactly what network you can put together out of there remains a good question. However, you know, there's 2 big players in the announcement in Hong Kong. China Eastern is a mainland Chinese airline, a government-owned airline, so there must be something, you know, of substance in that sense, and you have to take it seriously if that airline is involved. And Jetstar, of course, has done a great job with their low-cost model and taking their footprint through Asia. They both bring, I think, a good partnership to the table, and it will be very interesting to see actually how they go. It's very competitive out of Hong Kong. If you look at Hong Kong to mainland flights, there's 14 airlines that fly that. If you look at the chart up there, the line at the top is the share of that Cathay Pacific, Air China and Dragonair have relative to the other guys. They're very, very dominant. You look at it in a North and Southeast Asian market context, the story is basically the same, except there's a lot more airlines that are flying in both directions into both of those markets as well. So it's highly, highly competitive landscape, and you know, Cathay and the Cathay Group has a very dominant position there. Lastly, turning very quickly to Macau, my beloved Macau, also a very similar story, but different sort of geographic environment here. High barriers to entry also. In Macau also, once there was, but now there was not. Viva Macau, which was a medium and a longer haul airline, the longest flights being down to Australia, shortest flights being just down to Vietnam. Viva was basically a victim of aeropolitics in Macau. In my 3 years I was here, I think people who are friends and still here that remember me from then will know we were being quite vocal about that. And unfortunately, it hasn't really changed. There's no real home market to draw on. There's only 500,000 people that live in Macau, so you rely to some extent for a home market on Guangdong, and that's not so easy to draw from. So it was really about trying to build a new destination in Macau, which is a bit of a challenge when you only fly a few times a week to faraway destinations. It is home to Air Macau. Air Macau has a 25-year concession on all traffic rights in Macau. So Viva Macau existed under a sub-concession agreement which basically allowed it to fly to on some really busy traffic routes like Kathmandu, Christchurch, and all these places that are just loaded with people that want to come to Macau. Sound nuts? Absolutely, that was the situation. So, you know, it was able to muster together flights to places like City, Ho Chi Minh City, Jakarta, Tokyo, but they were on a charter basis which had 1 month approval at a time, so you were allowed to do it twice a week. So it was hardly going to be a way that you were going to establish yourself to be an effective low-cost airline on that market and be able to deal with it and exploit it properly. So it's unfortunate. Unlike Hong Kong, though, the airport in Macau is very underutilised. It's a beautiful airport. I used to fly into Macau, can be home and showered in bed from 10 minutes after the wheels touch the runway. You can't do that in many places in the world. So we've got a tremendous airport facility here in Macau that's underutilised and certainly would be fantastic for the exploitation of low-cost airline services from, say, 4 hours out into Macau to exploit all that Macau is building and become. So it's had some modest traffic growth from foreign low-cost airlines, But most visitors are still coming here by road, over the border, or by ferry from Hong Kong. Just to show here, there's a number of foreign LCCs that serve both Hong and Macau. And really all this, the point of this is just to show that they are separate markets. You know, some people sometimes tend to blend them into one. People come to Macau for different reasons than what they go to Hong Kong. And you can see from the chart there, some airlines choose to serve both. One or two actually have more flights into Macau than they actually have into Hong Kong. But it tends to be the low-cost airlines that are in Macau. If you look at it at the full, sorry, this is just a graph that shows the situation in Shenzhen and Zhuhai, because I guess they're the nearest mainland China entry points into Hong Kong and Macau, and they are quite popular entry points, and they do work effectively. If you look at the foreign airlines that are coming into Macau, really very few. They tend to all be, and all the regional full-service airlines tend to focus on Hong Kong, not Macau itself. So with that, that kind of sets the landscape, and we can move forward to a Q&A. I'd like to invite on stage a couple of colleagues, if I may. Susan Goh, who's the head of Greater China for Avalon, and if I can invite back also on stage Professor Xiaowen Fu, the Associate Professor at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Please join us. And may I, on behalf of Jonathan, apologise. Jonathan does have a ferry to catch, so we might just start if there's any questions from the floor with Jonathan before he leaves, and then we can continue with the rest of the panel and myself, if that's okay. So perhaps I might lead off, if I may. If there's any questions from the floor for Jonathan. Jonathan, sorry to make you the first guinea pig. Fire away. I guess we don't know the answers to a question like this, but perhaps just your thoughts. One may say that if you look at the explosion of LCC growth in Japan over the last year, one may say that perhaps one of the things that initiated that was the full-service airlines finally realising that they wanted to play in that space and wanted some investment, some investment in that space themselves, and then it seemed to sort of free things up, and all of a sudden airports that were previously inaccessible were all of a sudden accessible. Do you see that happening in mainland China?
You can already understand that the debate has been going on for some time. I mean, the full service, the big three in China, obviously are aware of what LCCs have achieved in Southeast Asia. They've seen what's happening in Japan now, and there is a dialogue going on, governmentally between the airlines, etc., and we are now part of that dialogue. As I said during the presentation, 2 years ago, we first started hearing Chinese officials talking about the notion of an LCC, which was very, very unusual. And then for it to actually be recognized as a pillar to the aviation industry's growth. This is a quantum change. It's a seismic change in the way that this is happening. So this indicates that these airlines are well and truly, as we see China Eastern now with Jetstar. This is not coming out of nowhere. This is actually slow, incremental change within the market. And we'll see more of that without question. One thing you can see is that now, of course, Spring is always focused on what other airlines have done successfully and unsuccessfully too, and trying to learn from them. But what we're seeing now is we're seeing a lot of government authorities from overseas and also other airlines coming to talk to us about what's happening, how the LCC works in the Chinese market. And then we have people from Ireland. When we had the Irish Prime Minister in Shanghai, he was very, very keen to see how you could take that Ryanair model, move it around and place it here and make it work. And the same when we had the Department of Transport Secretary from the US came out, and she deliberately asked for our CEO to come up and brief. So there's a real interest on how China's going to change and what will be the nature of that change. I think the change is there, but it's not going to happen overnight. We believe that there's plenty of room for liberalisation, and there's plenty of space within that market. It depends on how people can adapt and how the market will adapt and how the market will respond, because no matter how you do it, the market determines everything.
Do you think from a Spring Airlines perspective, hypothetical question, and your knowledge of what you've exploited so well and done such a terrific job with so far, do you think from Spring Airlines perspective there would be any worth in having a foreign joint venture partner, for example, in your business, and it would contribute anything there, or do you think it needs really local intimate knowledge and it's unnecessary?
I think both are critical. Obviously, if any airline comes in wanting to do a joint venture in China, you have to be fully aware of market conditions, the regulatory environment, customer expectation. Of course, this is critical. Any airline is going to do that, regardless of where they operate. And you'd expect them to do their thorough research into it. Chinese airlines, I think, of course, are prepared. You see Hainan Group doing all sorts of different business models in under one group structure. Spring is the same. We look at every opportunity. We see where opportunity is, see where reason for growth is. And often, growth is in unexpected places, regardless. And that can be the same in China, too. And, you know, this is why we are very keen as a company to develop strong relationships with local government. And we see that because they see this as a key driver. They know LCCs are a key driver of social change, economic growth. And that has been being supported not just in China, with places like Shijiazhuang, but also in Japan, our first international route, when we flew to Ibaraki. And everyone said, why on earth are you flying to Ibaraki? It's the craziest thing for your first Chinese private carrier to get an international operating license, and you fly to Ibaraki. Well, actually, it's an incredibly successful route. Of course, there are many areas in the China market which can absorb all different types of business models.
In your presentation earlier, I took a lot of attention to what you said about your social media strategy. It was something in CityLink in Indonesia we were also very focused on, because it also has a very high internet penetration, very high social media usage. Just out of curiosity, what sort of administration structure, how big a resource sits behind managing what you ran us through before?
You know, Spring Airlines always does everything in-house because it can, and it can control it, and because we are driven by cost control. We are, in that sense, a very dynamic LCC. We have a very small resource, and it was actually spread over our IT and our marketing departments, but also our Japan office too, running the Twitter account in Tokyo. But now we're actually seeing a much more strategic goal in how we're going to do it, how we need to expand it. The resource is very much tied to the international market. We want to have 20% of our routes internationally to China. Obviously, our strong point is that we are backed by the strength of the Chinese market, avaricious demand. It doesn't really matter where we fly or where we're based, we can still tap into that. But if we do, as we see successfully with Jetstar evolving their model into new environments, of course, we've seen what they've done, we've seen how successful, we could do that as well. But for us, we'd have to go through the same process. We need to be much more of an international organization, how we operate, in terms of our thinking, and having those strong local strategic partners that they all do for us to be able to do that successfully. But you'll see more of Spring around the region.
Again, just conscious of your time, Jonathan. Any questions for the floor from Jonathan before he has to leave? Yes. So we have some mics.
I'll speak really loudly.
Yeah, loud and clear.
Jeff Bennett from Worldwide Flight Services. Can I ask, how has your background and history as a travel agency contributed to the success of Spring Airlines today? Thank you.
Well, it's critical. I think it's critical. Number one, if you look at the history of the Spring Group, between 1981 and 1994, it was a period of huge growth for the travel agency. When we got to be the dominant player in the domestic market, we were already thinking about the next stage. The next stage was charter. And so we were instrumental in setting up that chartering business in China. From that, we realized that our future was directly linked to aviation. It was the next logical step. And our chairman traveled the world in the early 90s, thinking about that before any notion of possibly having a private airline in China, seeing what was happening in Europe with charter flights like TUI. He was looking at Ryanair, he was looking at Southwest, a whole series of airlines. He looked at JAL in Japan, whether we would do a full service, whether we were going to do an LCC, whatever. Finally, we decided on that LCC model. But from the get-go, we were always very lucky for two things. Number one, we were strategically placed. We were in Shanghai, so we could tap into that business and leisure market was in existence there. We saw that first wave of private airlines in China and the success they had and the others that failed. you notice the two dominant players in that are both Shanghai-based, Spring and Hainan. There's a reason for that. But we can tap into that affluence from this whole area, but also when it helps for us to develop new routes. And I was talking about this before with Ibaraki. Why fly to Ibaraki? How do you sell Ibaraki? Well, it's helpful if you have a travel company that can package Ibaraki as a Tokyo destination. And that allows you to build up your market slowly. So now over those 2 years we've been flying there, we've gone from 99% Chinese tourists on those flights to now 60% Japanese to 40% Chinese and probably 70% business to 30% leisure. So it's helpful for us to open up new markets, to pitch, to attract the customer there. But ultimately the goal is for Spring Airlines to rely on itself and develop those markets and sustain those markets.
Any other questions from the floor for Jonathan? Peter?
What's your attitude to using travel agents?
Sorry, in case you can't hear the back, Peter's question was, what is the attitude to using travel agents?
Yeah. This is, last year when we were in London at a conference looking at EasyJet, talking about moving into GDS and why it was doing so and how it needed to attract more business clientele. Obviously we thought, okay, is there a relevance to us? And yes, there is. Now the notion from day one, we have been outside the existing state monopoly of travel stuff. And we've done pretty well without having to do that. But we all know that the business traveler is making decisions at the last moment. They've got to actually know. They want to be these points of comparison. Where's the value? So yeah, we think about the notion of it. And we have actually now given a very small percentage of our top fares to C-Trip in China. Not across all routes, but on some. So there is that presence there. But we would never do that with the risk of, number one, being beholden to a GDS and the extravagant fees that they can charge, and two, taking away from our core strength, which is our own website and our own online sales channels. So if we do it, it's complementary, but our focus will always be on being direct B2C. We've done that very, very successfully in the past, and we know that the Chinese consumer is very sophisticated in the way that they search. They're going to look for value everywhere, and they're going to find us. We've just got to make sure that our online presence is strong, and we can attract that in. And it's a low fare proposition that will work. And this is why, when we talk about the business clientele, targeting that, this is part of that strategy, offering a certain amount online via GDS to be attractive to that clientele. But predominantly, we stay as we are.
Jonathan, how does that impact on the other side? I mean, in your home market, I understand that strategy in the sense of that. It's a very good strategy. But so then when you start getting into the international markets, like Ibaraki, for example, how do you sell in Tokyo and everything?
Well, we're lucky that, however we do these things, we have strong support from our strategic partners. And we've had great support from regional governments in Japan, regardless of where we fly. So Ibaraki has been remarkable, both in terms of airport, in terms of travel authorities, and in terms of local travel agencies wanting to stimulate the demand. And we've replicated that in places like Takamatsu and now in Saga, and recently flying our charter to Tori. So we see these things as strategic. First, we have to have our partnerships in place. Secondly, we have to utilize our strategic partners and their extended reach. Third, we think about channeling our marketing via social media. Again, very, very important, because we are not looking like Jetstar Japan or Asia Japan. We don't enter those markets with huge promotional budgets. So we have to be very clever the way that we do this. Also, word of mouth, as I say, is very, very important. We know there are obstacles in different markets whereby, some people are not prepared to use online to purchase international tickets. But for us, we see it's a slow education process. That didn't happen in China to begin with as well. But we've been at the forefront of trying to push that change. And I think if you do, and you direct your energies in there, it will pay results. And if you do it, if you can afford the luxury of doing it slowly and incrementally, it pays dividends, it extends your market reach, and it minimizes your cost structure. So that's what we'll continue to do.
Mr. Wu?
Yeah. I have a very quick question. I'm interested in the very high load factor. I was wondering, among the tickets Spring Airs sold, what's the percentage of ticket has been sold as a part of a package, of a travel package? Is this number large, or is it like
very, very minimal now? Essentially, you know, what you see, 85% is directly online via Spring websites, and again, it is, you know, you decide what you're buying. We are giving the customer the greatest choice in terms of what they want. Just not in terms of price, but in terms of product that we have, and I said it's a huge range of ancillary products, but also payment. Payment is extremely critical for the Chinese consumer. We work very, very strongly with all payment providers and also with all banks to make sure that the customer has ultimate convenience. But in terms of package now, we let the consumer decide, and they're increasingly more sophisticated in what they want. So to constantly bundle is a difficult proposition because you're trying to satisfy a huge range of expectation on the Chinese consumer. I think no airline would want to take that on.
I think we need to let you go, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Make sure you don't miss your ferry and blame us. So if everybody just, if you show your appreciation to Jonathan, please. Peter, if it's okay, we'll continue the panel for a few minutes longer. Yeah? Great, thanks. Susan, perhaps if I can ask you, from an aircraft lessor's financier's perspective, I guess, you know, the explosion that follows sort of an open LCC culture in a particular country or geography or territory, that's got to be something that would be absolutely incredible news for your part of the industry.
Sure. Well, I still remember the first meeting I had with Spring Airlines. That was back to 2005. That was actually before the maiden flight, well, even before they got the AOC. So I had the first meeting with the current the CEO, Madam Zhang, that time, and that was before they even chose Airbus, you know, to fly. And that was also the starting of the last wave of private airlines setting up in China. So that time there were 5 airlines to be approved by CAC to set up. And it ended up with went bust, and when got rebranded, and one got, you know, operation problem and ground, and now back to service. And the 2 are really, you know, doing well are now Spring and Junyao Airlines. They're both based in Shanghai. But, you know, I'm not trying to correct you in your previous slides, but, you know, even if you asked Junyao Airlines, are you low cost, they would not say they're low cost carrier, because, you know, they are not, and they do not plan to be. So I would say that, you know, it's widely recognized in China that Spring Airlines so far is the only successful low-cost carrier in China. And I have to say that, you know, because I have been working for airline, lessor, banks, so, you know, I would say that for LCC operating in China, they're facing a much more challenging environment compared to, you know, their competitors outside China. There are many different, you know, challenges they're facing. For example, firstly, this is a regulated, highly regulated market on everything. Pilots, you know, the routes, and also the fuel price is different, you know, compared to the outside China is regulated market as well. And in terms of, you know, the fare, it used to be highly regulated as well. You know, the airline cannot even decide, you know, how much discount they want to give, but which now is different. And also, you know, we have a government agency called NDRC. It strictly kind of monitor or control the amount of aircraft you could introduce. And also, we don't really have a very airline-friendly tax environment. You know, so you actually need to pay like withholding tax, which is, you know, more than what the airlines in outside China has to pay for. You know, that's on top of the rent. So all these things doesn't sound very positive for the company trying to set up low-cost business. But, you know, I'm not trying to be very negative. Actually, I'm a true low-cost carrier believer, and I'm actually a Spring believer as well, because you know, my previous job I was at HSH, we were one of the first bank to provide financing to them. And so I was just trying to say that it's not easy to do, to survive as a low-cost carrier in China, simply because of the reasons I have put. But obviously there are more opportunities compared to outside China. We have the largest population, and also we have the countries, next to bordering us or around us, like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, these regions. These all really create a huge market, for the airline in China. And also, recently we have local aircraft manufacturer, Plan Tribute, the CRJ, C919 and the ARJ, so which can be the opportunity to take advantage. And also we have a huge untapped market, which is in northern China, northwest of China. Currently, the main airline transport is still on the east coast. So whoever can enter into the north and western China as LCC business provider would have huge success. So it's all depends, and we already had a very successful company like Spring. They proved that LCC could survive, although with such challenging environment. So we'll have to wait and see. Can the new entrants enter into the new market, untapped market? Can they take advantage of the new opportunities? And also the government is kind of relieving the tax environment, to make it more airline friendly. Can they take that opportunity? So it's all depends how they do, I think. So this, we see huge challenge and opportunities, but really, airline need to perform themselves in the right way.
Indeed. Very good. Thank you.
Sure.
Any more questions from the floor? I noticed some other hands didn't get a chance earlier. Some residual questions there from anybody?
Probably, I would say something. I fully agree with you that low-cost carrier in China, they face many more challenges compared to their peers overseas. So it's really not easy to survive. But on the other hand, I would say because of the market competition condition in China, there are also opportunities. Recently, we look at the essentially pricing issues in China, because Spring Air, their fare is not going through BSP, so we cannot see Spring Air's fare. However, for the market where Spring Air entered, we could see other airlines' fare. So we look at the fare from 2007 to 2010. One interesting observation, actually, I almost thought I made a mistake, is that we look at the route, the fare before and after Spring Air's entry. What happened is all other airlines' fare, mostly essentially a full-service airlines' fare, their fare did decline a little bit upon Spring Air's entry. However, if you compare those routes that is market entered by Spring Air to all other market, their average yield is actually higher. So I cannot help to have this impression, at least, that what Spring Air has done is they look at essentially the route and look at what are the profitable routes. And then they go into those very promising routes, and without increasing their market share substantially to trigger a retaliation. Now, if you look at the market share, or in China, for the top 50 routes, the Spring Air's market share as before 2010, our data is that their market share, except one route, never reached 20%. Now, if for the routes after top 200, in some routes, essentially new destinations, essentially their market share is much higher. In some cases, like 100%. That's demand stimulation or new destinations. But if you look at the dense market, that kind of market outcome is very different from what we observe, for example, Southwest. Southwest comes in, their load factor is actually lower than industry average, like 60–70%, but they increase in major way with very high frequency. But if you look at Spring Air, for example, right now they have I think the domestic market is 60. They have 30 aircraft, which means each aircraft is going to serve 2 routes or 2 city pairs. And you can figure out that the average frequency is not that high. So essentially it's saying that the Spring Air comes in, the gets this market, and they do suppress the market price, but it's not in major ways. To some extent, I understand because the regulator is concerned about the market situation. I think the Chinese government's philosophy is, well, they have a problem in privatized airlines. As in other industries, like petroleum industry, telecommunication industry, they cannot fully privatize these airlines. But they somehow formed the idea, well, if they cannot fully privatize, at least they could increase efficiency by introducing competition. However, if only true competition can improve efficiency. But the government sometimes is afraid of seeing bloody competition. Then whenever the market gets sour, and some, especially the big airlines or big players, they have a problem in achieving break-even. This regulator sometimes cannot help to come in and say that, look, we need to really cannot waste the resources and do other things. So yes, I think the Chinese market is a little bit unique, faces a lot of challenges, but also my concern is if Chinese low-cost carriers, if they cannot be truly efficient, if they still be satisfied with a comfortable zone with the domestic market, in the long term, there may be some problems, not only from overseas, but also if you look at Spring Air and Zhenyao, they both have a lot of presence in Shanghai, which is China Eastern's hub. If you look at in other markets, I think only a few markets like Atlanta or Singapore, you can see a full-service airline essentially co-host the hub with a low-cost carriers. But as the full-service airline, if the low-cost carrier keep growing, at some point of time, the full-service airline may get upset. And then that's going to trigger some competition. I'm not sure about how low Spring Air's cost is, but in the long term, I believe this full-service airline, they're going to use hub-and-spoke networks to enhance their competitiveness in the spoke market to offset some of the competitive advantage. So I don't see any problem for Spring Air in the short run, but in the long run, if the substantial market growth, 15% a year, is slowing down, and there's competition from high-speed rail, and there's competition from overseas, and that time there may be some really serious competition.
Jonathan is not here, but otherwise we could ask him, I see their entry into Japan is like, well, I had this separate discussion with their team before. Actually, Johnny is also sitting here. Maybe he can correct us, if I speak wrong. But I see, their entry into Japan is an effort to try to break this regulation environment they're facing, because this is one way they can grow more efficiently compared to, the other Chinese private airlines.
Thank you, Susan. I think all very good observations. Time is running short, folks. We all do need to go and do our makeup. So perhaps one last question from the floor. So I need a lot of mirror time for my makeup. So one last question from the floor. We'll close the session. Any more questions? No? Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Please join me in thanking my fellow panellists this afternoon.